Hello everyone and welcome to Top Tips for Archaeology Graduates. Today I'm joined by Shannon, who is a caseworker for the Civil Service. Hi Shannon, how are you today?
Hi, I'm good.
So thank you very much for coming along. Can you tell us all about your job? So what does a caseworker do?
So I work in compliance. There's multiple government departments that have compliance caseworkers, and what it is verifying documents. So we'll ask taxpayers or the general public or sometimes businesses to supply documents, and then we're verifying what they've said they've done and seeing if their claims are accurate. So for Department of Work and Pensions, these could be things like universal credit claims. For HMRC, these could be things like tax returns. It just depends which government body you're under and which information you're verifying. So yeah.
What are some of the things that you enjoy about being a compliance caseworker?
It depends on which project you're on. It's very fast moving and no day is the same because you'll be working multiple cases each day, and it depends on which project you're on. So one day I could be looking at documents for one specific risk, and then the next day I could be told I'm looking for a different risk. So it changes pretty much daily, sometimes not so much, but it's never the same.
That's nice. It sounds like a very varied and a chance to work on lots of different things. So what do you find more challenging? I imagine working for the Civil Service is a job that comes with quite a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, so sometimes you're not giving the best news to the taxpayer or the business or the accountant, whoever that you're talking to, and those conversations can be challenging. But when you're upholding legislation, which most of the time you are, and you are giving information powers to do your job, you have to be quite resolute in your decision and communicate that clearly and fairly and provide the person with all of their options after you've made your decision. That bit can be quite difficult.
I imagine it involves quite a lot of diplomacy as well.
Yeah, you've got to be very patient, because at the same time, how I think of it is, if I was somebody calling in for help from any of the government bodies, how would I like to be treated, and think of myself in that position. But at the same time, you are trying to uphold the legislation. So that's a bit.
Yeah, there's a delicate balance to be drawn, and I'm sure one that you do really well. So how did you get into this position?
So it wasn't my plan. When I'd finished my master's, I did try to go into archaeology, but I don't drive, so that causes some problems, especially without being able to drive at all, not even just not having a car. And whilst I was at university, I needed a lot of pastoral care, so I was looking for an employer that could help support on that side as well. And that's kind of how I ended up in civil service. I didn't apply for any of the graduate schemes. They do have some really good graduate schemes, but after finishing education, I didn't feel like that was for me, so I just went on the civil service jobs website, found my job and applied.
Oh, that's great. Did you put in an application and have an interview just once, or did you go through several rounds of applying for things?
They have rounds, but there's different steps. So most applications, and all of them identical, everybody I work with went through the exact same process that I did. They'll ask you to do things like numerical test, reasoning test, verbal reasoning, and a situational judgment test. And then you'll have to do written competencies. Usually they're about 250 words, and then you'll get invited for an interview, and then at that point you're either offered the job role or not. They do have things in place like reserve lists, so if you've scored high enough, they can place you on the list for 12 months, and then if the job role comes up again, you'd be offered it from the reserve list. But it's a pretty clear process for any of the jobs that are on the website.
That's really great. Did you practice any of the things before you went through the application process?
I did with the written competencies, because when you're writing them out, you don't see the flaws in it. So it's always good to get somebody else to read it over and get their suggestions, especially if they already work in civil service. They kind of know the things to include. If you don't have that, they do have a framework guide that they attach on the website, and you can use that as a kind of indicator of what you should include and what you shouldn't.
Okay, that's great. That's really useful advice. So how do you think your archaeological degree has helped you, or what kind of skills do you think it gave you that you've been able to transfer into your career in the civil service?
Well, At first, it was mostly social, so it's a really big organization. My building has thousands of people in it, but archaeology degree in particular has helped with the icebreakers and the team building, things like the quizzes, because you've just got such a random knowledge. You don't know which bits of information you're going to remember, like prehistory to the present, you cover everything. And then when you're sitting there doing team quizzes in the building and you're getting very competitive, you're like, yeah, I know that. But then as time went on, it was things like record keeping. I have to leave really, really precise audit trails in pretty much every single case that I do. And we did a lot of that on excavation and things like the historical modules. You are looking at records as well. So it's skills that I didn't think that I would be using when I first applied that I actually use quite a lot on a daily basis.
That's really interesting. I think record keeping is something that translates to almost every career, and there's definitely archaeology. You have to keep those records. You have to be able to record what you're doing. So that's really interesting. So what kind of advice would you give to graduates, perhaps people finishing up their degree now who'd like to follow in your footsteps, who think working in the civil service is for them?
I think maybe not civil service, but definitely don't feel like you have to go into archaeology. I spent a lot of time being really focused on trying to get into archaeology before finally admitting that maybe it's not the best for me with all of my various disabilities. So then looking elsewhere and then being quite open to apply for other jobs. Don't feel like, especially in civil service, that a job role's too high for you. It's a very fair process. And if you do end up with a higher job role than you expected, it's because you've passed the requirements and they think that you are the right person for the role. So that's quite reassuring. I think a lot of people, when they're looking at it online, they get really caught up between the grades of the jobs and they get put off for applying for the higher ones. Just go for it. The worst thing that can happen is that you don't get the job. The best thing that can happen is you get the job. So
yeah, that's really, really great advice, I think. To aim high, but also to have confidence in yourself, and confidence in the process as well. That quite a few people have spoken to me on these chats about sort of how they had to overcome imposter syndrome to a certain extent. Yeah. And I think that's really great advice to say, actually, you know what, trust in the people around you. They've been doing this for a while, and that they'll make you put you in the right place. Thank you so much for joining us today, Shannon. That's a really interesting insight into your work for the civil service as a caseworker, and some really great advice, I think, on exploring all of your different options and not feeling like you've only got certain routes available to you. Yeah. You could find a job that you really enjoy, that's exciting and carries a lot of responsibility outside of archaeology as well. So thank you very much to Shannon for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for watching. Join us next time for more top tips for archaeology graduates.